Howdy, folks. Welcome back to the Kentuckian. We're certainly glad to be back with you. I'm excited. I hope that you all are excited as well. It's only been probably about 3 weeks since I've had something posted, but it feels like it's been a long time. Hope that you all have had a wonderful holiday season. It's been very hectic and busy for me. There's been a lot going on in a lot of different ways for me, but I'm glad to be back, glad to be started into the third year of the Kentuckian. For those of you that are new to the Kentuckian, if this is the first video you're watching, welcome. We've been doing this a long time, but it's mainly been a podcast. I've been on Spotify for about 3 years at this point and going into the third year, but I haven't really done many videos. And so if you've been with us for a little bit, you know that I've just started the videos here at the end of last year. I'm trying to switch from a podcast to more of a channel in general. I'm on YouTube, I'm on Rumble. You may, of course, you're watching me if you're watching the video on one of those platforms. And I really think this is going to be important for increasing and growing my audience and reaching more people and hopefully having a bigger impact. We have new content that's coming too. There were some other issues that got in the way of me getting some of that started last month, but we should be heading forward on it this month. We have the merchandise shop now. Don't forget about that. We have some new designs that are coming out, some new designs with new products, and then also some new products with old designs, adding them to some other things that haven't been available on the store before. Excited about that as well. Be sure to check that out if that's something you're interested in. You can support the Kentucky in that way and get some really slick merch while you're at it. So, all that out of the way, let's start into this first episode of the new year. Now, for this episode, I wanted to start out with a pretty basic topic, and actually, let me take just a second and remind you that this is new. So there's still a lot of things that I'm figuring out. My presentation flow, workflow, where I put stuff on in my studio, all that's taking work, and hopefully that'll continue to improve. Just as a quick aside. Anyway, let's get back to this episode. So for the first episode, I wanted to talk about you. The first episode of this year. Would it not stand to reason, I'm going to ask you this question, would it not stand to reason that if you understand better your personal influence and your personal power, the good or the evil that you can do as an individual, if you understood that better, wouldn't you be more willing and able to use that influence, use that power, hopefully for good? I would think that's a reasonable statement, and that's sort of the premise for this episode. I want you to understand that better so you can use it for good. So let's dive into it. The first main point I want to talk about is the importance of the individual in general, and not as much specifically other aspects of that. So kind of the general concept of where does the individual stand in the grand scheme of things. Well, let me ask you some simple questions. Who grows all the food that we all need to survive? Who works the factory lines? Who works the oil pumps in the refineries to get us gasoline and diesel and all sorts of other petroleum-based products? Who drives the 18-wheelers and the delivery trucks to move goods all across this country? Who stocks the grocery shelves? Who works the fast food joints? And who buys the vast majority of all these products that are being produced? You do. That's a big deal, right? All of the great mass of moving parts that keeps the world running, the everyday things that the whole everyday kind of grind that everybody goes through, all that only happens because of individuals, because of regular folks just doing their job. The world, society, modern conveniences and amenities and food and everything else wouldn't exist if it wasn't for the individual action of regular folks. If you decided to stop buying food because everybody started growing their own, that would have a world-changing effect, right? That's just one example. It all depends on you in your everyday capacity doing things like normal. And that was sort of the first big point. Like, things don't happen in this world if it's not because of individual people, just regular folks doing what they do. And we'll expand on that more in a minute. But I want to give you a different perspective on the importance of individuals and the role that they play in the world functioning as it does. This is something, and these are historical perspectives. There's three kind of references that I have. One of them is from Edmund Burke, and you've Good chance you've probably heard this before. Edmund Burke, he was a famous Irish-English statesman, very intelligent, very worth reading some of what he said if you get the chance. But he said the only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing. Well, evil triumphs if regular good people don't do what they need to do. It didn't say if some priest or some preacher or the pope or some cardinal, if some great quote unquote person did something, then evil triumphs. No, if regular people, if good people that want to do what's right just don't do what they need to do, then evil will triumph. General George S. Patton Jr. had something to say as well, very famous general from World War II, and I'm going to read, it's a little bit of a longer quote, and there's a few slight edits for language. If you know anything about General Patton, he was known for his colorful language. And I don't mean in that he used a variety of words, I mean that he used very rough language most of the time. So from this quote, and this is from a larger speech that he gave to some of his troops, I believe it was the Third Army at some point, but regardless, this is an excerpt from that when he is trying to convey this very thing to his soldiers, the importance that every soldier has, no matter what his job is. General George S. Patton Jr. All of the real heroes are not storybook combat fighters either. Every single man in this army plays a vital role. Don't ever let up. Don't ever think that your job is unimportant. Every man has a job to do and he must do it. Every man is a vital link in the great chain. What if every truck driver suddenly decided that he didn't like the whine of those shells overhead, turned yellow, and jumped headlong into a ditch? The coward could say, "They won't miss me, just one man in thousands." But what if every man thought that way? Where would we be now? What would our country, our loved ones, our homes, even the world be like? Of course, as you can probably guess, that's a rhetorical question that General Patton was giving to his troops. Every man's job is important, no matter how insignificant or small it may seem. And then this is a quote from Benjamin Franklin, and there's other quotes that have a similar indication, but this is one I picked. Only a virtuous people are capable of freedom. As nations become corrupt and vicious, they have more need of masters. He's talking about individuals. Only a virtuous people are capable of freedom. If we want freedom, individuals have to take up that mantle of moral responsibility, or we can't be free. And that's something we've talked about on the Kentuckian before. If you'd like to check that out, that's I've talked about it. I mentioned it several episodes. I had one specifically on it. I don't remember which one it was right now. But you can go back. That would be a Spotify episode if I remember correctly. But hopefully that really conveys the idea to you, just the general idea that if it wasn't for regular people doing regular things, the world wouldn't exist as it does. You are important just because of that. But another point that I want to make, something we need to be reminded of, is that we need to remember that all the Napoleons and the Washingtons and the Wright brothers and the Churchills and all the other great men of history at one point came from the individual regular folks' masses. They are people too, just like you and me. Yes, we put them on a pedestal. Yes, people write books about them and there's statues of them. And their works may have literally changed the world. Their inventions and their exploration and their designs and their risk may have literally changed the world, but they're still people, just like you and me. And something to take from that is to recognize that you may have greatness latent within you. You may have that same capability to get out there and do something exceptional, and you just haven't tried, or you haven't discovered it yet, or maybe you don't believe that you can. You very well might, because it's regular people that have always done those sorts of things. Maybe there's extraordinary circumstances, but oftentimes as you study these characters, you'll find that most of the time it wasn't. It was they made extraordinary circumstances for themselves by their education and their hard work and their perspective and their intelligence that they developed. And you will see that vein, thread works as well, that vein or thread all throughout history. But regardless, even if you're not destined for greatness, if you want to use that term, and that has a potential, the potential accuracy of that is up for question, certainly, but maybe you don't have that capability or that desire or whatever the case might be to be someone in those sorts of extraordinary circumstances. They are called, the word extraordinary comes from extraordinary, right? It's not normal. So maybe you're just ordinary, and that's perfectly fine. We need to remember that every great man of history would have never been great if it weren't for the support of people. Regular folks, ordinary folks, if you want to use that word. I mean, who fills the ranks of armies? Not generals, the private soldier, right? The regular soldier. Who buys and reads the books that these great titans of literature wrote and made a living off of? Well, ordinary folks. Who funds the exploration and the experimentation that leads to human progress? Ordinary folks at the end of the day. I mean, you think about the Wright brothers. Well, how were they able to design the plane? You might not know this. They owned a bicycle shop in Dayton, Ohio. And that was how they made money. And then they tinkered and worked on engines and gliders and stuff in the back until they felt that they had enough data to go to North Carolina and actually experiment with their full-size gliders. They were able to do that because they did a regular job and people bought their bikes, their bicycles. That's regular folk. That would have never happened if it wasn't for ordinary folks supporting someone, even if they didn't support them because they were experimenting with gliders. The point still stands. I hope that you can see that. So even if you're not going to be one of those, even if you're just going to be ordinary, that's perfectly fine. You still have a vital role to play. Just make sure you play it, which we'll get to in a minute. But another question would be, what's the practical application of all this, right? Okay, this is fine. The individual plays a massive role. The world as we know it would not exist if it wasn't for ordinary, regular folks doing ordinary, regular things, making sure they're doing what's right. Evil would flourish if it wasn't for men doing what was right. These great men came from the ranks of ordinary folks because they're people too, just like you, just like me. And they couldn't have done their great things without the soldiers to fill their armies, without the economic support of people, without the what's the word? Emotional support, if you want to say that, the moral support, right? I bought your books and they're writing letters about how great of a job you do, and that keeps them pushing forward, whatever the case, right? Okay, you understand that now. I hope that you understand it. You have influence. Boycotting, that's another example. Voting. You can have an influence on who is in office. Boycotting, you can say this company is doing something unethical. I'm not going to buy their product. And well, now that company goes out of business, or they change their stance, or people refuse to fight in an army because it's an immoral dictatorship, or whatever the case might be. That only ever happens because individuals take action. Regular, ordinary folks do something about it. And that's, as we're thinking about the practical application, first of all, recognize that you do have potential. No matter what your ability is, you have the potential to make a real impact for good or evil. Because remember, Hitler and Stalin, they had followers too. They had people filling their armies. They had people working in their factories. But you have the ability to have a major impact simply by doing your job. And doing it well, or doing it for the right reason, or doing it for the wrong reason, right? You have a big impact that way. And you need to understand that. What you do matters, no matter how small it seems. Maybe Hollywood doesn't make a big deal out of it. Maybe the big radio talk shows and the movies and the TV shows and maybe even the books and pop culture doesn't make a big deal. The music anymore maybe doesn't make a big deal out of people doing ordinary work. But that doesn't mean it doesn't matter. It absolutely matters. And never let yourself forget that. Remember that as the individual, ordinary, common folks that you might be, again, maybe you have great, maybe you're doing something exceptional. And ordinary, I guess, also has a certain variability to it. Some ordinary people do amazing things. I hope you don't take what I'm saying as saying that ordinary is bad, or, what's the word? Ordinary is unimportant, because ordinary can be like a really big things, right? It could be a person campaigning for a person to get elected, a judge or a magistrate or a governor, right? And you go canvassing, going door to door. That could be considered ordinary. I guess maybe perhaps a better term would be what we may consider small things. It's not the Hollywood. It's not the people running the mega corporations, or being a congressman or a president or a senator, right? I do hope that you understand that. I probably should have clarified that earlier. But remember that you as the individual, as the regular folks, if you will, you are the medium of change. Maybe you don't do those exceptional things, but again, without you, no real change happens. You can have the people that go out and campaign for a politician's place. You can have the people that go out and fight a war and there's some great general or strategist, or take your pick of those great things. Without regular people behind them, it means nothing. That change never really happens. And you need to understand that. Understand that you're not just having an impact to your family. You're not just having an impact in your community necessarily, or even your state. You can have an impact, and do have an impact on this whole country and the world by just doing what's right and doing your job. Now, that certainly is not saying not to push yourself to do more. But like I said, if you do stick with the ordinary, that's perfectly fine. That's important. But do something. And that brings me to the next point. Recognizing the influence that you have, whether you do ordinary things or you push to do extraordinary things, or somewhere in between, right? Recognizing and understanding that means nothing if you don't actually do something. If you don't actually make use of that power and influence that you have. And that's a big part of what this episode's about, encouraging you to do something. You have power, you have influence. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise. You do. By your actions, by your example, you have an influence and power on others. Yes, maybe it's not as much as some, but everyone has it. And you can do good with that, and you can make a real impact with that. That's one of the reasons what I always sign off with. And I have basically, I think since the very first episode, no, as long as you and I are doing what's right, we make a real difference in the world. I say that for a reason. It's true. Maybe that impact isn't quite as much as other people, but as a collective, that's how the world has changed. That's how evil is stopped and good conquers. That's how evil temporarily conquers good and maybe takes over and starts a world war. Maybe takes over and causes people to suffer for decades, right? It's that everybody doing their part. It's that collective working together and doing what's right, or unfortunately at times what's wrong. So I hope that you can walk away from this episode a little better than when you first turned it on and started listening and watching, hopefully. Know and use the power that you have as an individual. You're likely going to surprise yourself with the kind of impact that you can make, but make sure as well that you're using it for good. Again, you can use it for evil. Every individual has to make that choice, what they're going to support, what they're going to use that, whatever amount of power and influence that they have, what they're going to use it for. And this is something we've talked about before on the Kentuckian as well. If you're not using it for good, you're using it for evil. There is no neutral when it comes to good and evil. There's no neutral when it comes to where you spend your time in the grand scheme of things. Obviously, there's things that aren't innately right or wrong. But make sure that you understand that and get out and do something. As little as you might think it is, it makes an impact. And like I said, if you really get out there, you're probably going to be surprised with the impact you're actually going to make. We need people that'll stand up and do something, do what's right, and they will make a difference. Believe that. I hope that you believe that. As we conclude this episode, remember that an important path to growth for the Kentuckian is dealing with the algorithms that YouTube and Rumble and other platforms use, and social media and so on. And hitting the like button, hitting the Rumble button, subscribing on YouTube and Rumble, those do make a big difference in that. They affect my visibility. We've talked about doing what you can. I've said this before on the Kentuckian. This is what I see is what I can do. One of the things that I can do. It's not the only thing I do, but it's a big thing, right? It takes a significant amount of time. I've put money into it. I put effort into it, and I'm doing it because I think I need to, right? I know I can make a difference with it, and I have, and I hope to make a bigger and bigger difference. And maybe you feel like you can support me in that. I hope that you can. I hope that I've given you a reason to support me. And it does mean a lot for I don't have a very large audience at this point, but I have a devoted audience. And to you all, thank you. It means a lot to me. It encourages me. I get a little feedback here and there from people. I get sometimes questions, when's the next episode coming out, and that sort of thing. Really does mean a lot to me. I've had a couple people about merchandise. I hope more people look into that. And that's not just going to be political or Kentuckian themed down the road. I hope to expand it and just have a lot of good quality merchandise to choose from. But that it all adds up, right? Everybody, it's one of those things, like if you have 100,000, I don't know, say you have a radio show, just for example, you have 100,000 listeners and everybody gives $1. Well, you've just changed that radio host's life, right? And you've enabled him to do things that he probably didn't dream possible. It's $1, right? From each per. Well, that's nothing. And that kind of goes to that idea of, if you have the collective, if you do what you can, even if it's not on an individual basis much, it really can make a huge difference. And that's just an example of, maybe he's trying to grow his show and maybe he wants to quit his job. And to do that, he has to make a certain amount of money. Well, $1 a year isn't much, but now if enough people do it, completely change and turn this guy around. Just an example, right? I don't think a lot of radio stations work that way. It's just to help illustrate that point. If you'd like to help me in a more personal way, I do have a Patreon page. You can check that out. My social media, I'm going to be trying to post there more, get more consistent with that. That's a great outreach tool. I'm not very consistent. I've had a hard time developing those habits, but I'm going to be working on that. You should see an increased social media presence as we go forward with the Kentuckian. And if you follow us there, that's a great way to keep up to date, or will be a great way to keep up to date on what's going on. Facebook, Instagram, and so on. And basically everything will be linked in the description of this episode. If you are interested in the merchandise, right now I only have that linked, mainly only linked on the Facebook page. So you can go and there's a link on the Facebook page for that. So if that's something you'd like to check out, please, consider that, and you get something out of it. It really helps me as well. So I think that's about everything for this first episode back for 2023, the third year going into the Kentuckian. Again, very excited about what the future is going to hold. We've got new content coming that isn't just the normal episodes, so I hope you'll stay tuned for that as well. And remember, friends, as long as you and I are doing what's right, we make a real difference in this old world. This has been Ryan Dalton of the Kentuckian, signing off.